Welcome to HP Fanfiction. Support me by subscribing the channel. Also, like and share the video to keep me motivated to make more videos like these. He had been too young to understand the necessity of the move, too young to understand the conflicting that was happening outside the family home. For Harry, everything changed overnight. One day he was a happy, content and certainly loved child. The next he had woken in a home with strangers that held no such affection for him. His memories hazy and only vague images of the lady with red hair and the man with the glasses. Oh, how he had hoped they would rescue him from his misery, that they would tend his wounds and bounce him on a knee once more. However, it wasn't to be. Similarly, he had woken one day to find himself in another new home, this one with people who were cautious of him, but who had certainly treated him better than the last. The man cared for him, that he could tell. The woman was an enigma, though she warmed to him as the months and years went by. The older man was something else entirely. He had been neither cold nor warm towards him, treating him with a wary respect, and would come by occasionally to check on him. He would test him on the lessons Cassie and Sirius had been given him, nodding approvingly when Harry would answer correctly, and even adding his own thoughts for Harry to ponder. He too had eventually begun to hold him with something akin to affection. What Harry had been given was the very thing that had been taken from him, and he learned to appreciate it all the more, even more so when the doubts he had that these people truly did care for them were put to rest, and now it was their blood that ran through his veins, their magic he had been taught, and it had been them that helped mold him, not the man he was becoming. Shaking his head of his thoughts, he pushed open the large gate, and the magic of the wards washed over him as he crossed the threshold into the property that he had once considered home. He tapped on the front door as he reached it, slipping easily into a demeanor of respect that had been drilled into him by his grandfather. He was not on good terms with the Potters, but they were close in status to the Blacks, and that afforded them a level of respect many others would not be granted. After only a moment of waiting, the door opened and he was met by Lily Potter, the same eyes he had seen reflected back at himself in the mirror, full of apprehension and a little hope, gazing at him. "Come in, Harry," she offered, her voice small as she stepped aside to allow him entry. He replied with a nod, ignoring the familiar smell of Muggle cleaning products that permeated around him. It was oft that Lily would clean the home using Muggle practices. She had been raised in such, and the habits of her own mother had stuck with her throughout her years in the wizarding world. Harry remembered seeing her on her hands and knees, sporting yellow rubber gloves, as she scrubbed the hardwood floor. He remembered James laughing at what he found to be a trivial effort. One could achieve the same, if not better, results with a wave of a wand, but Lily would not hear of it. She took pride in her cleanliness, and James simply watched, bemused by the effort she put into such a seemingly small thing. "I apologize for the lateness of the hour. It has been a strange evening," he offered, breaking the awkward silence that had fallen between them as she led him through the foyer of the house. "Think nothing of it," Lily dismissed. "It has been a rather eventful night for us also." The two entered the dining room before Harry could reply, his eyes widening slightly at the sight of his grandfather sat at the table with James Potter. He shot the former a probing look, wondering why he was here also. "I had my own business to discuss with Lord Potter," Arcturus answered the unasked question. "I do, however, find myself curious as to why you have ventured here so late in the evening." Harry released a deep breath, not knowing where to even begin with what had him seeking out his other family. "What can you tell me about the cloak?" he directed towards James. The man frowned as he shrugged. "Not very much," he admitted. "It's been in the family for at least the past 600 or so years. My own grandfather studied it more in depth and traced it back as far as he could. I found a diary extract from one of my ancestors in our vault that mentioned it from about the same time as he did." "Why? Is there something wrong with it? Do you not find it strange that an invisibility cloak could last so long?" James chuckled at the question. "I asked my grandfather the exact same thing. He said it was a very special cloak, one that was likely from before we took the name Potter. He wouldn't speak of it any more than that. He said I was too young to understand, and he died before I ever got the chance to bring it up again." "Took the name Potter?" Arcturus broke in, his own curiosity getting the better of him. James nodded, his countenance becoming nervous as he pondered his next words carefully. Yes, our roots are with a much older family. The original Potters were merchants as far as I know, not poor but certainly not held in high esteem amongst families such as your own. My ancestor married the last surviving member of the family probably around 1,000 years ago, and her titles and such were absorbed into our own name. We have been the most ancient and noble house of Potter since, he explained. Arcturus nodded appreciatively at the history lesson. He had not known that about the Potters. Truthfully, very few knew much about the family at all. They had always had an air of mystery about them, but had risen quickly through wizarding Britain through business practice and their prowess with magic. He frowned as another question surfaced in his mind. What family was it yours absorbed? James swallowed deeply, reluctant to divulge anything further. One look at Harry had him wavering, and he sighed. It can go no further than this room, he said firmly. My grandfather did all he could to rid our family of any association to them, and for good reason. Arcturus nodded his agreement. We are descended from the Peverells, James revealed in little more than a whisper. The name was vaguely familiar to Harry, and if his grandfather's reaction was anything to go by, it was much more significant than he knew. Arcturus had scoffed, his usually calm composure cracking as his eyes bulged. Do not jest of such things, he hissed. The Peverells are nothing but a myth. Who are the Peverells? Harry broke in, surprised by the vehemence with which his grandfather spoke. Arcturus shook his head at the question, but answered as best he could with what little he knew. The Peverells were a family, said to have lived centuries ago. Their reputation is shrouded in stories of necromancy and acts against magic itself. According to some, an invasion carried out by wizards from the continent was ended by only 3 members of the family. Between them they destroyed an entire army after most of the family had been wiped out. People believed they had made a deal with Death himself to aid them in avenging their loss. Death granted them his blessing and magic, and they were victorious. After that the family faded into obscurity and were never heard from again. Some believe the deal they made with Death cost them their souls, and others that they themselves were Death's chosen champions, and they now rule the afterlife with him. He shrugged. The Peverells were the family that the Blacks told their children of to scare them into compliance. No record has ever been found of the family truly existing, just whispers, rumors, and foolish children's tales. To say Harry was surprised by the story would be an understatement. The coldness of the stone in his pocket weighed heavily on him, as though it was making its presence known as truth was being spoken. He doubted much of the tale, but was not foolish enough to dismiss it entirely. Almost all stories have a semblance of truth about them, and it felt important that he found it. That's where you're wrong, James returned nervously. The Peverell family did exist. 3 of them are buried in Godric's Hollow with the rest of the Potters. Arcturus released a deep breath, and Harry frowned, still not understanding the significance of their existence. Just because they existed doesn't mean the stories about them are true, Arcturus pointed out. I never said it did, James defended. Just that they did exist, and my grandfather did all he could to erase them from our family history. Arcturus could only nod, a frown marring his features. So, there is no trace of them, other than the graves? James shook his head. It's information I'd rather keep unknown, especially with what I found etched into the gravestones when I found them. What did you find? James conjured a piece of parchment, a quill and a bottle of ink before scratching a rather strange rune into it and sliding it across the table. Arcturus picked it up, his eyes narrowing.
Grindelwald's mark, he growled.
It made no sense to me either, James replied. These people were around long before him. That's why any of this must not leave the room. I will not have my family associated with him. Is it possible that he is related to them also? Harry interjected. No, James denied. His family lineage has been traced back much further than them, and there is no connection. How he ended up with this mark as his own is a mystery. Lily snatched up the mark that Arcturus had deposited and grinned. This is the mark of the Deathly Hallows, she announced triumphantly. Both James and Arcturus shared a look before snorting and laughing in tandem. Don't be a fool, girl, Arcturus chastised. The Deathly Hallows are a bloody children's story. Lily raised an eyebrow of disapproval towards the man and her husband. Pandora doesn't think so, and Xenophilius is convinced they are real. Come on, Lils, the Lovegoods aren't exactly all there. Don't get me wrong. I like them, but you can't seriously believe half of what they say. I didn't say I did, Lily defended. I was explaining that the mark is the same one that represents the hallows. What are the Deathly Hallows? Harry cut in irritably. A fool's errand, Arcturus replied. Men have wasted their lives seeking out something that does not exist. Lily shot him a scathing glare before she spoke, addressing Harry. The Deathly Hallows are said to have been created by death and given to 3 brothers who managed to outwit him. I'm sorry, she added quietly. I never got around to reading you the story of the 3 brothers. What was it they got from him? Lily turned the symbol to face him, her finger gliding over the lines as she explained what each part represented. The Elder Wand, a wand so powerful that any who wields it is said to be unbeatable. The Resurrection Stone, she continued, tracing the circle that surrounded the line representing the former, a stone capable bringing back anyone from the dead. Harry felt his heart sink at the explanation of the second, but Lily continued before he could find his voice. And a cloak of true invisibility. Any that hides within it will be undetectable, even to Death himself. Nothing more than a children's tale, Arcturus reiterated firmly. Harry swallowed deeply as he shook his head. The story might be exaggerated, but the hallows are real. I've got 2 of them. 3 pairs of eyes watched him warily as he pulled the cloak from his pocket, James's eyes lighting up in recognition. When I went to deal with McNair, I was wearing this, he began. I walked into his house as if the wards weren't there. For how old this is and how it can take you through wards, it has to be one of them. Or it could be a very spectacular cloak created by someone that hasn't been replicated, Arcturus countered. Harry nodded. It could be, he agreed, but I don't think this is anything like that, he continued as he removed the stone from his pocket and placed it on the table. This is what brought me here tonight. What is it? Lily asked. Harry shrugged. This was the stone that formed part of the Gaunt family ring, he explained, his eyes never leaving those of his grandfather. I destroyed the thing with fiendfire and this survived. Impossible, Arcturus whispered. I wouldn't have believed it if I hadn't seen it myself, Harry replied understandably. It wasn't until I got the cloak that I noticed the magic between the 2 is the same. Whomever created the cloak created the stone. Are you saying that is the Resurrection Stone? Lily gasped. Harry nodded, his throat constricting slightly, as his hue fought back the tears, beginning to form. He retrieved the stone from the table and looked upon it reverently. It was an accident, he insisted. I had no idea what this was until it happened. What happened, Harry? Arcturus urged worriedly. Charlie, he croaked. I brought Charlie back. Lily drew a staggered breath, placing her hand over her mouth in disbelief. Where is he? James asked. He went back, Harry answered, a slight smile pulling at his lips. He came back in a way but wasn't really here, or so he said. He asked me to bring him to you so you could speak a final time. See, can you do that? Harry frowned and pondered on how it was he had brought him back the first time. He remembered turning the stone in his hand as he thought of his brother and him appearing shortly afterwards. He gave a nod of affirmation. He asked me to, so I will if you're ready. James gave Lily a comforting squeeze of the shoulder, indicating that he would support her with whatever she chose. She took a moment to compose herself before nodding resolutely, and Harry set to work. He turned the stone thrice in his palm as he thought of his brother, even whispering his name on the final rotation as the Potters and his grandfather looked on in a mixture of concern and anticipation. Hello, Mum, a nervous voice sounded from behind where the Potters were stood. Those within the room froze in shock at the appearance of the deceased boy before Lily launched herself towards her son, pulling him into her arms, seemingly unperturbed by the coldness emanating from him. She began scolding the boy as she squeezed him, with James walking towards the pair at a sedate pace, as though in a trance of disbelief at what had just happened. Over the shoulder of the embrace of his mother, Charlie shot Harry a grateful nod and slight smile as his father reached them. I couldn't be any prouder of you, Harry, Arcturus said from beside him. Despite your feelings towards them, You've given them the closure they needed. You're a good man and they're getting more than they deserve because of you. Maybe, Harry replied, I may no longer see them as my parents, but they're not bad people. Not really. Naive and trusting of the wrong people. Undoubtedly, but Charlie would not have turned out the way he had if not for them. Arcturus offered his grandson a nod of approval. So you forgive them? Harry shook his head. Never, he sighed. They're not bad people, but they gave up any right to me being their son, the day I was given away. Call me a child if you will, but it will always be there to some degree, the bitterness and resentment. I can't just switch it off as though nothing happened. I am a black raised by blacks. Nothing will ever change that. He felt the aged man's hand grasp his shoulder and squeeze it appreciatively. You are a black, Harry, and you'll prove to be amongst the best of us. I cannot give you any higher praise than that. Harry felt himself swell with pride. It was not often one would be complimented so by his grandfather, but he felt every word, and it only steeled his resolve to be the best that he could be for himself, and the man that stood beside him that had spent years teaching him everything he could. Himself and Arcturus looked on as the Potters conversed amongst themselves, both content to allow them their privacy. Harry had his moment and he would allow James and Lily the same. It was several moments later that Charlie beckoned him to join them, and he did so somewhat reluctantly, not wanting to intrude on the emotional reunion. How are you feeling? The younger boy asked him as he approached. I can go longer, Harry answered, aware of the drain on his magic that was keeping his brother here. I can't, Charlie admitted tiredly. Whatever this is wrong. I don't belong here anymore. Something is trying to pull me back. Harry could feel it too. The pull on his magic strengthening, fighting against him and his efforts. I know, Harry whispered. It's getting colder. Charlie offered him a sad smile as he pulled him slightly away from James and Lily. Before I go, I need you to do something for me. 2 things really. Harry nodded and offered his brother a grin. You're only saying that because you know I can't say no. Charlie shook his head. You can say no, I wouldn't force you. What do you need, Charlie? Harry replied with a faux frustrated sigh. Keep an eye on them. Charlie answered with a nod towards his parents. His expression as serious as Harry had ever seen it. I'm not expecting you to be a happy family or anything. I'd just feel better if you were looking out for them. I love them, Harry. Just check on them occasionally. Harry nodded, unable to deny his brother a final request, and Charlie gave him a relieved smile in return as he stepped closer. Just remember they've lost 2 sons now. No matter what they have done, they don't deserve that, he whispered, as he put his arms around his older brother. Harry shivered as he returned the gesture, nodding his understanding. You said there were 2 things, he reminded him. There was, Charlie confirmed, leading him towards James and Lily. He looked upon the 3 of them for a moment before releasing a deep breath, his eyes settling on his sibling. I don't want you to bring me back again. He silenced the following protests with a wave of his hands, choking on his words as he spoke once more. This is where we say our goodbyes, he said emotionally. If you keep bringing me back, how will any of you move on? What if we don't want to? Lily bit back. Charlie smiled at his mother, his eyes full of tears and admiration for the woman. I'm dead, Mum. Me being here like this won't do any of us any good. Any argument Lily had died on her tongue as she tried to counter the boy. There was little she could say or do to justify her thoughts, only that she was a mother who loved and missed her son terribly. He's right, James broke in sadly. It's not fair on Charlie or any of us. Charlie gave the man a grateful nod. I'll miss you, all of you. He clarified, but it is time for me to go. If where I am now is kinder than here, we will all be together again one day. Harry could only stare at his brother through the tears that had formed and broken free, his grip firm around the stone. Let me go, Harry, Charlie urged. Harry swallowed and nodded reluctantly, his grip loosening. The image of his brother began to fade and a look of relief formed on his pale face. Oh, and Harry? Charlie called as he became near invisible. I love you too, brother. You let me go last time before I had the chance to say it. Harry gave a watery chuckle as Charlie vanished and he stood staring at the spot the boy had spent his final moments. He knew not how long he remained there, but it wasn't until a tentative tap on his shoulder pulled him from his reverie that he became aware of those around him once more. He turned and found himself face to face with a teary-eyed James Potter, his arms wrapped around his wife. "Thank you, Harry. There's nothing that I could ever give you that could show how much we appreciate what you did," he said quietly, offering a trembling hand. Harry only hesitated a moment before taking it in his own and shaking it firmly. "It was the right thing to do for you and for Charlie." James nodded gratefully as Lily pulled herself from her husband and paused a second before hugging him tightly. Her brazenness caught him off guard, and James moved to help him, his eyes wide with worry at how he would react. Harry stopped him with a subtle shake of his head and put an arm around the woman, rubbing her back awkwardly. Rather than, after what seemed an eternity, she relinquished her hold and extracted herself, an apologetic smile adorning her lips. "Thank you," she whispered timidly, before placing a kiss on his cheek and joining her husband once more. Harry found himself in a state of shock, having been unprepared for the embrace and kiss. "It's late. I should go," he managed to say, wanting nothing more than to escape the awkwardness of the situation. He turned away from the Potters and pocketed the cloak and stone before heading towards the door. "Will we see or hear from you again?" Lily called, pausing him in his steps. His first instinct was to deny her, to say that it would be unlikely. The words of his brother, however, sounded in his mind, reminding him of his promise. "It would be impolite for me to not respond to the letter you sent," he replied before taking his leave, his grandfather following him from the house. "Are you okay?" Arcturus asked, as they moved towards the gates. "Fine," Harry answered quicker than intended. "I just want this all over with." Arcturus nodded his understanding. "As do I," he responded, his mind wandering to all that was left to achieve. There were still horcruxes out there, of that he was certain, though he had no idea where to look next. The others had come to him in the most fortunate of circumstances he doubted would be replicated again. Those, however, were the least of his problems, and could be dealt with after Tom was dead, if necessary. What concerned him now was the impending Wizengamot meeting and what it was he would do after. The time to hand over his power was drawing ever closer, and he could feel it in his old bones. He looked to his right, where Harry walked beside him, his heart filling with warmth. There was none better to leave his legacy to, and he no longer had any excuse to not pass it on. "Soon," he whispered internally. Break. Where time had once been his burden, it was no longer so. So far had he sunk into his new life, that time itself no longer registered. Were he to ponder it for but a moment, he would realize that still he had not been here close to as long as he felt. The only indication that proved this notion was the meager amount of chocolate that still remained, his need and dependence on the trivial confection having grown considerably throughout his time here. At first, when he had been distracted by each passing moment, it had not been such a necessity. However, the longer he spent within these walls, the need for it grew, and his hunger for it had to be sated, lest he were to begin losing his mind. The chocolate, though, was finite, and he had steadily consumed all but a few squares. What would happen to him after it was gone, he did not know. What he did know was that his work was one person shy of being complete, and the one he looked forward to least. Somehow he had managed to extract anything useful from the others, his fraying temper having gotten the better of him on a few occasions. There were those that would no longer be fit to serve in any capacity, their minds and bodies irreparably damaged by his efforts, and others that could serve but not satisfy their own proclivities. All in all, he deemed his work successful, untidy in many cases, but not without its jubilance as he punished those that deserved it. Arcturus would likely be unhappy to some degree, but he found he did not care. It was not Arcturus Black that had to endure the memories of the acts these people had carried out in the name of a madman, or to simply cater to their own disturbing pleasures. Perhaps he would feel different towards his own actions when he sobered from the haze that had descended over him. Perhaps not. That was something to worry about when he left, and soon he would leave. After his final task, he would be gone. It was no longer safe for him to continue residing here. He sat in his bed and blew warm air into his frozen hands before standing, the action little more than habit. Even his breath so close felt icy to the touch. Pocketing his belongings and reverting the cell to what it was when he had arrived, he bid it an overdue farewell and headed towards the only cell he had yet to visit. He had passed it on a few occasions, the occupant following his movements with curious eyes. Purposely he had left this one until last, not for any other reason than he suspected the memories within her mind would be the worst of all. Arcturus had warned him. His granddaughter was the most devoted, her once brilliant mind having been twisted into something he had long recognized when he had last set eyes upon her. The black madness, he had called it, a madness so ingrained that when it set in there was no escaping its grasp. He paused as he reached the cell, the woman already staring at him expectantly, and did not flinch as the door screeched open. Her form was skeletal, her long thick mane of hair streaked liberally with grey and her violet eyes almost black. She grinned maniacally at him, her teeth rotten with several gaps, where many had fallen out during her time, and were it not for the gesture, he would have guessed that she was nothing but a decaying corpse. She had once been beautiful, of that he had no doubt, graced with the same ethereal beauty that all black females seemed to be blessed with. Now she sat a mere shadow of her former self, the years in this hell having taken their toll on her appearance. "I suppose it is my turn," the woman croaked, her smile widening, her voice hoarse from lack of use. Leo simply nodded. "I do find myself wondering why you are here. Why have you willingly come to Azkaban to speak to us? Death Eaters, I've watched you go from cell to cell to extract all the information you can. The only things that make sense is that you are a journalist. Doubtful, you are here for another reason." Leo narrowed his eyes at the woman, her clarity surprising him. No other had been so articulate with their words, their coherence scrambled by their time imprisoned in such a place. "No, that isn't it," she continued. "That only leaves one other possibility. The Dark Lord has returned as he always said he would." The smile she wore turned feral, her eyes alight at the realization before she cackled gleefully. "Oh, my poor boy. You have no idea of the enemy you have made. The only question that remains is just who you are here on behalf of. The Ministry, Dumbledore?" She spat. Leo chuckled darkly, causing the woman to frown. "It is your master that has no idea of the enemy he has made. I'm not here for the Ministry or for Dumbledore, but someone else, someone you know very well. I know many fools, but none so foolish to stand against the Dark Lord." Bellatrix hissed. Leo leaned back against the cell door, his arms folded across his chest, and he smirked, reveling in irritating the woman. "Well, let us not stand on ceremony. Who is it that has sent you?" Leo pushed himself away from the door and approached her, kneeling so he could look into her eyes. "I was sent here by your grandfather Arcturus Orion Black," he revealed. "Lies," Bellatrix screeched, launching herself at the boy, her shackles around her wrists, the only thing preventing her attack. Leo took a step back and shook his head. "Your master provoked them and he will pay the price. You yourself should know that the vengeance of the Blacks is something to behold." "My grandfather would not," Bellatrix denied frantically, talking more to herself. "He wouldn't. Taken aback, Leo had to stop her from smashing the back of her skull against the stone wall. She fought him for a moment before collapsing forward, her breathing heavy from the exertion. "He promised he would not interfere. He promised he would not involve himself in the war. He said he would not fight me." Tears rolled down her cheeks as she shook her head, and then she laughed. It was not a laugh of humor but one of despair. "Why?" she shouted. "Why would he fight against my master?" Leo took pity on her as he sat a short distance away. "He never intended to. Your master attempted to kill his heir after he killed his brother." "His heir?" Bellatrix questioned confusedly. "Draco is his heir. Sirius was disinherited, and Regulus is long dead. Why would the Dark Lord come for Draco?" Leo snorted. "The Malfoy Brett is not the Black Heir. That little shit was cast out along with his mother. A good thing too. The boy is a pompous little prick just like his father." Bellatrix giggled at his summary of the Malfoy patriarch. "Lucius is a moron. Sissy. Allowing her son to turn into him is surprising. If he didn't have his money, he would be nothing. The Dark Lord would never have wasted his time on him." "Well, he is nothing now," Leo replied with a satisfied grin. Bellatrix's eyes widened. Oh, do tell. It has been some time since I heard a good story. She crossed her legs, her eyes full of anticipation at the idea of hearing a tale. There's not much to say. He tried to cross your family and lost every penny he owned in a duel, he answered with a shrug. So his money belongs to the Blacks? Bellatrix questioned. Leo shook his head. It belongs to me. I beat him in the duel and that was my prize. Bellatrix giggled again before sobering quickly. You said it was the Blacks he had wronged. Why was it you that duelled him? Lucius named it as part of his terms. No member of the Black family could fight him. If he won, Draco would become the heir of Black, and if he lost, his fortune would go to the victor, me, he explained. Bellatrix bit her lip as she scrutinized the boy in front of her, for that's what he was. He could not long have entered manhood, judging by the boyish, youthful features he possessed. For such a risk, my grandfather must trust you, she sighed. Are you his heir? Who even are you? Leo snorted. It doesn't matter who I am. But no, I am not his heir. His heir is my best friend. The closest thing I have to a brother, and your Aunt Cassie, a mother. Cassie? Bellatrix asked almost hopefully. I thought her dead. Leo shook his head. Aye. She is very much alive and has been good to me since I was a boy. She cared for me, gave me a home whilst I wasn't at school, and even took me on as her apprentice. Bellatrix was paying attention to him, evidently enjoying discussing her family. A formidable witch. I always admired Aunt Cassie, she whispered. What of the rest of my family? My mother, father? All dead, Leo answered apologetically. The only Blacks remaining are your grandfather Cassie, Sirius, and Harry. Oh, I thought more would have made it, she said sadly. I didn't know your parents, but I'm sorry for your loss. All the Blacks I know and have met are good people underneath all the terrifying stuff. Bellatrix nodded almost gratefully at his words. Who is Harry? Sirius's son. Leo nodded. Originally he was his godson, born to the Potters. It was Harry and his brother, your master, attacked the night he fell. He failed and they both lived until he returned and killed Charlie. A Potter as the Black heir? Harry is a Black. He has been raised by them since he was a baby and would not take kindly to being called a Potter. Harry Potter, Bellatrix whispered almost familiarly. Green eyes with a purple wand, she muttered. Sorry? Leo asked. Bellatrix shook her head. Nothing, just a foolish dream I had once. A boy named Harry saved me from a terrible fate. His eyes were bright green and his wand was purple. Leo frowned, reminding himself he was dealing with a woman of questionable sanity. Well, I suppose we should get on with it. You have a job to do after all, though. Don't expect me to give up my secret so easily. My mind may not be what it once was, but I too was trained by Aunt Cassie. It was Leo's turn to be surprised at how candid the woman was being. Aye, no point delaying it. I don't want to be in here any longer. Try 13 years, Bellatrix replied. The mental shields she had managed to salvage over the years slamming into place as the boy slipped into her mind with apparent ease. The resistance he faced was much stronger than any other in the prison, still much weaker than it would have once been, but impressive nonetheless. She wrestled with him, and for a while a stalemate between the two ensued until Leo managed to begin viewing snippets of events gone by, a young Bellatrix walking the halls of Hogwarts, a meeting with a group of cloaked figures, a wedding ceremony she was taking part in reluctantly, and of her receiving the mark. That memory was one filled with pride. It was then he realized she was using misdirection to show him only what she was willing to give up, so he doubled his efforts and felt her control begin to buckle. She was good, likely once as good as Cassie, but 13 years in this environment had all but worn her ability in the mind arts, and she wavered again, this time unable to take back any control. The memories now came freely, and her efforts to prevent his viewing of them were for naught. He witnessed acts of depravity carried out by the woman and her cohorts, felt the visceral thrill she experienced torturing helpless souls that pleaded for their lives, those unable to fight back cowering, offering all they to be spared. Those that could fight back did so and fell at the overwhelming numbers they faced, numbers that very few could hope to survive against. It was cowardice in its purest form, many attacking one or few in the dead of night where help would not come so quickly, and he felt his anger build. Neither men, women, nor children were off limits to these monsters, and thoughts of what happened to his own parents surfaced. Knowing his state of fury was not conducive to effective practice, he took a moment to compose himself before diving back in, his focus on memories pertaining to the Dark Lord. For Bellatrix, these were many. Often she would be tasked with leading groups in attacks, be subject to praise and flattery for a job well done, and even share private meals with the man himself. Numerous as they were, it took considerable time and effort to sort through which were important and what could be discarded out of hand. For the most part, the subject of discussion between the two was of tasks carried out and future tasks that he could no longer prevent, but one memory was one he felt to be of particular importance. He watched as Bellatrix was summoned by a masked man and led to where the Dark Lord was sat at a desk stroking a large snake of the likes he had never seen, conversing with it as though it were a much-loved friend. He had witnessed Harry do the same over the years with his own familiar, but something about this snake was not right, nor the discourse taking place between the two. Not only did it appear different to any other snake he had seen, but its eyes would flash between a reptilian yellow and the very same red of its master, and the conversation shared in parcel tongue evidently much more in depth than he had ever seen. When the man became aware of Bellatrix's presence, he addressed the snake a final time before it slithered away, eyeing the woman with suspicion. "She is a wonderful creature," Bellatrix panted as her chosen approached. The Dark Lord smiled as he placed a finger under her chin, causing her to shudder. "My dear Bella, she is much, much more than a simple creature. She is perhaps my most prized and trusted friend. Not including yourself, of course. Your loyalty is unwavering, and she is just as loyal, if not more. She is me and I her after all." Leo frowned internally at the words, immediately alarmed by both the snake and the man's reverence of it. If such a thing held such importance to the man, it was something that Arcturus would want to know of. Bellatrix's eyes narrowed at Voldemort's declaration, and the man chuckled. "I digress," he near hissed as he cupped her cheek almost affectionately, placating her somewhat. "I asked you here for a reason, a task I would trust no other with." "Whatever my lord wishes," Bellatrix breathed in reply. Leo watched as the man approached a desk and hooked a seemingly inane cup onto his finger by one of the two handles. He stared at it for a moment, almost considering his actions before he returned to the woman staring at him with such devotion. He smiled before handing her the cup, her body trembling as his hand grazed the skin of her own. "This is something irreplaceable, so important to me that there is only one that I would trust with its care. That person is you, Bella. I need you to protect this as though it were mine own body." "What is it?" Bellatrix questioned, the disappointment and disgust of being tasked with something so seemingly beneath her clear. "What it is matters not. What matters is that it is kept safe, above anything else. You possess. I hope the day it is needed never comes. However, shall that day fall upon us, you will know what to do." The memory faded, and Leo switched his focus to any other that contained the cup or snake. Those of the latter showed nothing new, and the serpent, when present, usually looked upon the gatherings of her master's followers with a keen eye and occasionally offering a hiss of warning or disapproval. The cup, however, appeared in only one other memory, depicting a woman in dark robes and concealed face entering Gringotts. Leo watched as Bellatrix entered the bank, her gaze shifting frantically to ensure she had not been followed or unknowingly walked into a trap. "I wish to enter my family vault," she hissed towards a passing teller. The goblin frowned at her for a moment before nodding his consent. "Very well, Mrs. Lestrange, please follow me." Leo watched as the woman entered the infamous cart and was violently propelled through the twists and turns of the track and into what could only be the darkest depths of the bank. Exiting, she shot another suspicious glance around before approaching a large, iron door with a crest of a crow sat atop a golden symbol. Approaching the door, she bit her finger to draw blood and wiped it across the lock in the center. A few seconds passed before the clinking of locks coming undone could be heard, and Bellatrix took a step back as the door creaked open. When it was fully ajar, she shot the goblin that had accompanied her a scathing glare before endeavoring withdrawing the cup from within her robes, before levitating onto the uppermost shelf, and nodding satisfyingly. "I wish to be notified should any other enter the vault other than myself," she demanded of the creature, who bowed to her request. "It shall be done." Again the memory began to fade, but before Leo could peruse the woman's mind any further, he was pulled from it as a loud explosion sounded somewhere in the distance. The cell he was rumbling from the shockwave only seconds later. "What the fuck was that?" he questioned aloud, gripping his wand tightly. Bellatrix cackled gleefully through the congealing blood smeared around her face, where her nose had apparently bled from her efforts to keep him from her thoughts. "The Dark Lord has come for me," she squealed. The inhabitants of the adjoining cells remained unmoved by what was occurring on the upper levels of the prison, even as another explosion sounded, this one closer. Leo took comfort in their lack of reaction, the work he'd done on them leaving them in a stupor of unawareness. "He's going to kill you," Bellatrix whispered excitedly, interrupting his thoughts. "Aye, he might if he had the chance," Leo replied with a smirk. "Like I said, I have no plans of sticking around, and as I don't have time to finish my work here, you'll be coming with me, lassie." Bellatrix screamed in fury, before Leo felled her with a stunning spell and removed the chains anchoring her to the wall. He bound her with hastily conjured ropes and held on to her tightly, waiting for the moment he would be able to apparate out of the prison. With explosions such as the ones he had felt, the wards around the island would inevitably fall. The wards, however, stayed firmly in place as another explosion, even closer, rocked the prison and sent him into the wall, winding him painfully. Groaning, he pulled himself to his feet and wiped away the blood from a wound that had opened on his head. Frantic voices had him scrambling to erect defenses against the incoming Death Eaters who had managed to navigate their way to the isolated cells, too falling to his spell work for their intrusion. Hastily he swept his wand upwards, folding half of the floor against the door of the cell in a bid to buy some more time to think. The situation he found himself in was bad, and he needed to escape, not only to give Arcturus the information he had gathered, but to see Katie again. He refused to die here without either of those. Thinking quickly and seeing it as the only way out, he pulled Bellatrix tightly against him as he directed the other half of the floor to form on the opposite side of the cell, effectively sandwiching them between the two parts. The second, however, he left with a small gap in the middle, just big enough to aim his wand through from his position. Not knowing what was on the other side of the wall in which Bellatrix had been chained to, he fired a gouging charm, removing a large chunk of the stone. He fired the same charm again and again as he felt spells impacting against the concrete protecting his back, muffled voices screaming curses as they attempted to breach his defenses. With renewed vigor and desperation, he continued his onslaught, his eyes widening as a steady stream of water began to trickle from the wall he was attacking. "Shit," he cursed, the logic of such a thing having been lost on him. Being so far under the prison could only mean the cells on the lower levels were underwater. "Looks like we are going for a swim, lass." He fired a blasting curse this time as something sharp stabbed into his back, the prison wall in front of him finally giving way to a cascade of icy North Sea water. With a hiss of pain and a wave of his wand, a bubble formed around the head of Bellatrix and his own before he forced the pair of them through the jagged opening he had created as lights of varying color lit up the area they had absconded from. Wanting to put as much distance between himself and those that had attacked, he kicked his legs with all the energy he could muster, his prison-induced weakness hindering him, making the effort all the more arduous. Thankfully, the attackers did not seem keen on following his path, and with no help from the burden in his arms, he managed to get a reasonable distance away from the island, far enough that he felt the wards wash over him as he left their reach. Sighing in relief, he tightened his grip around the woman and apparated to one of the only places in Wizarding Britain he knew. He wanted nothing more than to go to Katie or directly to the Blacks. He, however, had not been made privy to the secrets of their homes here. The former he doubted would be pleased to see him having escaped Azkaban with one of Britain's most notorious prisoners in tow. Thinking quickly, he apparated them to Hogsmeade, and it took considerable effort to send a Patronus to the only people he could trust to retrieve him. He was tired, magically, mentally and physically, his time within the walls of the Forsaken Island having taken its toll on him more than he thought possible. With a final push, he managed to drag himself and Bellatrix into a nearby alley where he could only wait, fighting the need to sleep and breathing heavily to be rescued from his predicament. Break. The Dark Lord stepped over a pile of debris, the results of a defense he had not expected to find at the prison. The explosions were not of his doing nor of his followers. They had begun to detonate the moment his people began approaching the prison, sporadic eruptions falling several of his people. Much to his anger and dismay, they had stilled the efforts to enter the building, only his threats of much worse to follow causing his Death Eaters to continue with diligence, fearing him above whatever reprisals they may face within the walls. He himself was content with looking on, knowing that any resistance could be dealt with by the more capable of his entourage. The Dementors had stepped aside as expected, but the explosions continued to sound the further in his followers progressed. For a brief period he feared that they had all been killed when silence finally fell. He waited with bated breath for several minutes before Lucius emerged from the haze and approached, falling to his knees in deference. "My lord, we have found them," he managed to stutter. "The others are bringing them as we speak." "Very good," Voldemort hissed. Again he found himself waiting for several minutes before those that remained of whom accompanied him returned, levitating several people between them. He frowned at their sodden appearance, his head tilting questioningly as he approached. "What is the meaning of this?" he questioned, his voice little more than a whisper. "We were hindered, my lord. One of the cells was blocked, and when we managed to break through, the entire lower level was flooded," a masked man explained. Many that had come from the depths of the prison were struggling for breath, some half drowned. A slight smile, however, formed on his face as he took in the appearance of his most loyal they had come to liberate. "I find myself pleased to see you, Rudolphus. You will be welcomed back into the fold and rewarded for your loyalty, all of you," he added, his stare flitting between those that had spent well over a decade shackled. He frowned when he received no response from the man, and crouched to look into his eyes. Rudolphus simply gurgled, his once hard eyes bereft clarity. "They are all the same, my lord," the masked man spoke once more. "None responsive, and most having been cursed in some way." Voldemort growled as he stood tall, searching for the one follower he would not be without. "Where is Bellatrix?" he hissed. "Gone, my lord," the man answered nervously. "It was her cell where the flood came from." The Dark Lord gritted his teeth, seething at the turn of events. Not only had his most loyal follower been taken, the others had been left in a pitiful state and would likely never recover. "Wellen," he spat. "Was Wellen there?" The masked man swallowed deeply as he shook his head. "Gone too, my lord. He killed 2 of our own before escaping." Voldemort's anger was beyond reason as he leveled his wand at the man and reduced him to a pile of ash with a flame darker than the night sky above. So quick did it happen, there had been no time to scream. "So our efforts were for nothing," he hissed. "We have nothing to show?" The followers around him murmured amongst themselves, none willing to submit themselves to the fury of their lord. "How many did we lose?" he questioned Lucius. The blonde looked around, grimacing at how few of them remained of those that had been chosen. 23, my lord," he replied quietly. 23, Voldemort echoed angrily. "All of your efforts will be directed into finding Bellatrix. Do not disappoint me." "My lord, what of those?" Lucius asked, pointing to the gathering of rescued Death Eaters. "Bring them. Perhaps something may be salvaged from this evening after all." With little more than a slight turn, Lord Voldemort left the island of Azkaban, his thoughts turning to his recent failures. Since his return, none of his efforts had yielded a favorable outcome. Potter had escaped, and he had been injured, and now those he had once relied on were no more. Bellatrix was gone, and would unlikely be returned to him, and for the first time in his life, he felt the grasp of defeat tightening around him. He shook his head of those thoughts. There was none that could stand against him. Potter had been fortunate thus far, but fortune was finite. His luck would run out soon, and when it did, the Dark Lord would be waiting for him, ready to put an end to his miserable experience. For now, however, he had to find a way to rebuild his ranks, replace those that were no longer viable, and turn his focus towards the bigger picture. Potter was but one boy after all. He had an entire country to bring under his heel. Break. Harry was preparing to retire for the night, his experiences of the evening leaving him depleted physically and emotionally. Upon returning home, he had spent time in the kitchen with Arcturus and Sirius, filling his father in on what had transpired. He had been in utter disbelief at their claims, demanding answers that neither could truly give that could explain the phenomena they had witnessed. It was not until the sun was close to rising that they decided sleep was needed, only for the trio to be halted as a large Patronus formed in the room, setting them on edge. Hogsmeade, the labored voice of Leo sounded, urging them into action. Even before the apparition had vanished, the three blacks were in the village with wands drawn and scanning the area for threats. Finding none, they relaxed somewhat, ready to defend themselves if the need arose. Hominum. Revelio. Arcturus muttered. His grey eyes searched the area before he stiffened and pointed towards two shapes that had been revealed to him huddled in an alley, a short distance away. Over there, he exclaimed, pointing towards the darkened, narrow passage. Harry charged ahead, the tip of his wand igniting on his way. What he found within the alley not only confused him but worried him equally. Leo was seated, his back to the wall, with a woman cradled in his arms, bound and seemingly stunned, both soaked through. "Leo?" he called as he reached the duo. Through barely opened eyes, Leo gazed towards him hopefully, releasing a deep breath before coughing violently. "He came before I could finish," he wheezed. "We have a problem." "Bellatrix," Sirius growled as he arrived. His wand pointed towards his cousin. "Not now," Arcturus interjected, eyeing his granddaughter cautiously. "We need to get them both out of here." Harry nodded and proceeded to relieve Leo of the woman. He handed her to his father, who looked upon the woman with utter contempt. As Arcturus attempted to pull Leo to his feet, the boy hissed in pain, the wall he had been pressed against covered in blood from a deep wound in his back. "You'll be all right," the older man assured him as Harry helped to steady him, his grandfather unable to hold the weight of his friend alone. Taking in his appearance, Leo looked terrible, and not because he was wet and wounded. He was pale, shaking, and had lost considerable a lot of weight during his incarceration. It would take some time for him to recover. "Gringotts," he moaned. "He has one in Gringotts." "Has what?" Arcturus questioned. "Whatever it is you're looking for. The Lestrange vault." Arcturus shook his head irritably, releasing a deep breath at the implications. Instead of mentioning it, he helped Harry transport the boy and his granddaughter back to Grimmauld Place. She would be checked over and held for now, and he returned to Cassie so that she could personally see to him. She would have it no other way. The woman was elated to see the boy, though she shot him a scathing glare for his condition before taking him from the room, not showing any awareness to the woman that had been brought along with him. "Take her to the basement, dry her off and make her as comfortable as possible," he instructed Sirius, waving off any protest the man may make. Tiredly he sunk into a chair at the table. "What a night," Harry sighed. Arcturus snorted humorlessly. "I fear it will only get worse," he replied. "Not unless you have any idea of how we can break into Gringotts and one of the more protected vaults in the bank." Harry could only shake his head. So a thing did not bear thinking about. For the umpteenth time he adjusted his tie in front of the mirror before wrenching it from his neck, and depositing on the ground. Dragging his hands through his hair, he released a breath of frustration, his inability to complete the simple task getting the better of his temperament. The morning thus far had been one annoyance after the other, and the tie was the final straw. He knew not how much longer he could maintain the facade of composure. "Let me help," the voice of Tonks broke into his thoughts, calming him slightly. He gave her a grateful smile as she reached down and placed it around his upturned collar. "And where did you learn to tie a tie, Miss Tonks?" he asked. "I used to help my dad with his," she answered, the tip of her tongue poking out the side of her mouth as she focused on the job at hand. "There, all done." Harry admired her work in the mirror, her effort proving to be much better than any of his own. In his reflection she was stood behind him, a smug grin plastered across her face, causing him to shake his head. "Thank you," he offered genuinely. "You look as beautiful as always." The woman flushed under his praise, her eyes drifting awkwardly towards the floor. She was wearing a black dress, which was unusual for her, who preferred the comfort of jeans and a t-shirt on most days. Her hair had been colored a deep red, her eyes blue, and her figure a little lither than her natural form. To him it mattered not what she wore or how she looked. She would always be beautiful, would always be just Dora. "Flattery will only get you so far," she replied, Recovering from her timidity, Harry snorted slightly, causing her to raise an eyebrow in his direction. "Something to say?" she questioned threateningly. Harry chuckled and Tonks pouted. "You know your threats don't really work. How many times have you tried to draw your wand on me? I'll get you one day," she grumbled. "Maybe," Harry shrugged, "but today isn't that day." Tonks narrowed her eyes at him before huffing and leaving the room, her nose turned up in the air. "Where are you going?" he asked. "Somewhere where my prowess with a wand is appreciated." Harry followed her quickly, reaching the stairs when she was halfway down. "I do appreciate your prowess with a wand," he called. She ignored him and he continued following her, cursing under his breath. He was 2 steps shy of the bottom when a loud squeal sounded, followed by a crash. Flicking his wand into his hand, he rushed around the corner to see Tonks sprawled across the ground in front of the kitchen door. "Are you okay?" he asked, as he reached her, offering his hand to help her to her feet. "The bloody troll foot tripped me up," she accused, glaring at the offending object. Harry frowned. "It's a troll foot," he deadpanned. "It tripped me up," Tonks growled. Harry stared at the umbrella stand, fighting his urge to laugh. The thing was where it had always been. As distasteful as it was not cursed or charmed in any way. Sirius had seen to that personally. "What the hell was all that racket?" Sirius questioned, as the kitchen door opened. He too apparently was having issues with his tie as he was attempting to make it look presentable. He seemed to be having little success as he growled at the garment. "Apparently the troll foot tripped her." "It did?" Tonks insisted. Sirius stilled his attempt to knot the fabric around his neck before releasing a bark of laughter, falling silent quickly as a wand was pressed under his chin. "Keep laughing, mutt," Tonks warned. "She's fast," he muttered. Harry nodded his agreement. "See, I told you I admire your wand work." His father's eyes lit up, an inappropriate quip ready to be unleashed upon the duo. Evidently he thought better of it as he deflated the wand of his cousin still primed for use, and his son shaking his head as a warning of his own. "Fine," he sighed as he returned to the kitchen with Harry and Tonks in tow. "What on earth was all that?" Arcturus demanded as they entered. Harry was just admiring her skill with a wand, Sirius answered before either of them could explain. Again, his eyes were alight with mirth, pleased that he was able to make some semblance of the filthy humor he was well known for. Harry again shook his head as Tonks's hair briefly flashed a much brighter red. "So long as he's not admiring it around me, I couldn't care less," Arcturus returned evenly. Sirius burst into peals of laughter as both Harry and Tonks were horrified by the older man's cund. Cassiopeia shot her brother a look of disapproval before firing a stinging hex at Sirius, sobering the man immediately. "Really, Arcturus?" stooping to his level. Arcturus merely shrugged, cracking a rare grin as he winked at Harry. "Are you ready?" he asked. Harry nodded. "As ready as can be," he sighed. "It will be fine," Arcturus assured him. The Potters know to play along and Tom would not be so foolish to attack. "Not after Azkaban." Harry smirked slightly, his plan having gone as well as could be at the prison. The Prophet had reported the breakout of the prisoners the following morning, with the ministry coming off as incompetent. Scrimgeour had no answers for what had happened, only several bodies of Death Eaters floating through the lower levels of the prison that was no longer fit for purpose. According to the interim minister, the current inmates would be moved to an undisclosed location whilst Azkaban was repaired. The only downside to what had happened was that Leo was unaccounted for and had been labelled a wanted man. Scrimgeour would not listen to the consensus of the populace, who was still firmly supportive of the boy, his actions throughout his time in Britain having made him more popular than expected. Currently, he was resting and likely asleep, as he had been for the most part of the 3 days that had passed since his return. He only woke to eat before falling into a slumber again, his emaciated body needing rest from his experience. Cassie had personally tended his wounds and was seldom away from him, doing everything she could to aid his recovery. Bellatrix was a different story altogether. She had been furious when she woke, barely eaten, and spat curses at Sirius whenever he would check on her. Harry knew he would have to speak to the woman soon, but not until after his brother had been buried, and it was not something he was looking forward to. As the prospective next head of house, it was his responsibility to ensure she was as well as could be, though she would get no special treatment from him. Her past actions were not to be dismissed so easily. If he had his way, she would be cast out of the family in due course, and he would hand her back to the ministry at the earliest possible opportunity, but not until Tom had been dealt with. He would not risk such a threat to the public, and the Dark Lord would certainly do all he could to have the woman returned to his service. Shaking his head, he checked the clock on the kitchen wall, a rather unpleasant construct made of bones, of which the origin was unknown. "It's time," he announced to his family. The mood immediately became somber, the occasion to come by no means shaping up to be a pleasant experience. Harry had never attended a wizarding funeral, his only experience being a muggle one he had been forced to attend, whilst living with the Dursleys. He doubted that there would be much difference, and he had no interest in the ceremony. It was nothing more than a spectacle to witness the body of his brother be put to rest, his final goodbye having been made to the boy himself. He felt a hand wrap around his own, offering a comforting squeeze, and he looked to see Tonks staring at him with concern. "I'm okay," he assured her. He had shared the story of what had happened with the stone and the apparent resurrection of his brother. She had been rather perturbed by the entire ordeal, but had been happy with him, supportive and pleased he'd been able to have closure. She didn't truly understand it. If truth be told, he didn't either, and the hallow had rested in his drawer since that night. Perhaps he would find further use for it in the future, but until then he would leave it be. It would not do to dwell on those gone by when those he cared for were with him here and now. "Are you expecting trouble?" Cassie questioned. She would not be attending the funeral, having volunteered to watch over their latest prisoner, Crouch and Leo, in their absence. "Unlikely," Arcturus answered, "but stay alert. It would be foolish to be lax. And what about Barty? Shall he be with us for much longer?" Arcturus shrugged non-committedly. "I'd kill him if the ministry wasn't aware we had him," he muttered. "I've gotten everything useful from the shit. I can take him in or leave him somewhere. The auras would find him," Tonks suggested. "No need to involve yourself, Nymphadora. I appreciate the offer, but I will see to it," he replied. "Are we all aware of where we are going?" "Godric's Hollow," Harry replied. Arcturus nodded before disappearing with a gentle pop, followed shortly by Harry, Tonks and Sirius. They arrived in front of a churchyard that was full to the brim of an assortment of witches and wizards here to pay their respects to the boy who lived. Harry chastised himself internally. He had forgotten just how famous his brother had been, and evidently admired by Wizarding Britain. Ignoring the stares that followed him when people became aware of his presence, the group worked their way through the crowd, and Harry was grateful none attempted to offer their condolences. Many eyed him with awe, and some equally warily, most likely not having expected him to be in attendance. It mattered not. He was here for one reason only, and it certainly had nothing to do with the looks of adoration and hope that followed him as he made his way to the front of the church. Reaching the large oak doors, he was greeted by the sight of James and Lily Potter, the former giving him an almost imperceptible nod in greeting as agreed upon. Were their plan to succeed, it was essential that there appeared to be a rift between them, that no accord had been reached. He returned the gesture, a sad smile gracing his lips as Lily took in his appearance. He had replied to her letter, candidly and with honesty. He'd explained that it was unlikely that forgiveness could ever grant it entirely, but he was willing to get to know them for who they were, and not the demons he had painted of them in his mind. He had extended an olive branch, a chance, though he could promise them no more than that. After only a moment after they had arrived, the church bell sounded the 11th hour, and Harry, along with his own entourage, followed the crowd entering the building, led by the Potters to a rather dreary, yet fitting song played on an organ. The three blacks, along with Tonks, managed to secure seats on one of the front rows, and waited for the service to resume. Whilst the church was idle, Harry couldn't help but glance around to see just who it was that had attended. He hadn't expected such a large turnout after all. To his left, he spotted several crops of red hair, indicating that the Weasleys were here, amongst them a familiar bushy brown also. He should have expected that both Ron and Hermione would not miss this. Charlie was part of the trio, now reduced to two. He felt for them just as much as he did James and Lily. From what he had learnt, they had been with Charlie from his first year of schooling, the three infamously inseparable. Only a short distance away sat many members of the Hogwarts staff, Dumbledore and McGonagall, the two he was most familiar with, and leaning against the wall at the end of the row, clutching a handkerchief likely the size of a bedsheet, was Hagrid, his red eyes visible from where Harry was sitting. The man was much gentler than his large frame would suggest apparently. Spread throughout the rest of the room was a plethora of people he did not recognize, some draped in the red robes of Aurors and others swathed in ones donned for occasions such as this. In amongst them he noticed several fingers adorned with head of house rings, even the upper echelons of society having deemed the spectacle worthy of their time. He snorted as he shook his head. He doubted most here had ever even met Charlie, nor had much to do with the Potters. It wasn't his place to ponder such a thing, however. He himself had not long been reacquainted with his brother, much to his regret. Thinking of the boy once more, he faced the front of the room where a black coffin rested and waited for the ceremony to begin, aware of a hand resting on his own. After what felt like hours but was likely a few minutes, an elderly black-robed man approached a podium and addressed the room. Harry's eyes remained focused on the coffin, uninterested in what a man who did not know his brother had to say. Instead, he remembered the time they had spent together, as few as they were compared to what should have been. He remembered trying to feed him when he himself was barely capable of holding the baby securely enough to do so. Consequently, both had been covered in milk, much to the amusement of James and Lily. His thoughts continued up until his final moments in the graveyard. Charlie had grown during the year, his confidence increasing just as much as his ability. He began to smile more, his demeanor often cheerful rather than dour or melancholic. It warmed Harry to think of him this way and saddened him equally. His brother had only just begun to find himself before his life was ended. He swallowed deeply, fighting off the overwhelming sadness that threatened to overwhelm him. He had done his crying and he had grieved for his brother. By a miracle of magic he had even said his goodbyes. The time for tears had passed, now he had to concentrate on what was to come. Dwelling on what can no longer be changed would be neither productive nor what Charlie would have wanted. His reverie was broken by the sound of music playing once again, and those seated within the room rose to their feet as the coffin was carried out by several wizards, dressed similarly to the man that had delivered the service, the crowd following in their wake. They left the church and the grounds, again ignoring the following stairs. The next part of the service would be conducted privately, only those of the Potter family allowed to enter the final resting place of those bearing their name. When they were out of sight, Harry gave the others a nod before disappearing silently, appearing amongst a collection of marked graves, many dwarfed by statues befitting the status of those that had been buried here. The area was peaceful, the lawn well kept and copse of elder trees surrounding the site. It was a rather beautiful place of serenity that Charlie would rest in. Just a short distance away was James and Lily, the pair having been granted the desired privacy to carry out the final part of the ceremony, both seemingly pleased to see him. Apologies for the secrecy, he offered as he reached them. We understand, James assured him. If our plan is to work, it must be this way for now. Harry nodded, looking amongst the various tombstones around them. Quite the legacy many of these people have left, James declared, breaking into Harry's observations. Your great-great-grandfather, a revered hit wizard and duelist, he explained, pointing towards a gravestone to their left. My own father, he continued much quieter, the most wonderful man you would ever meet, formidable to those that threatened his family. But I couldn't have asked for better. Lily rubbed his forearm comfortingly. The loss of his father had evidently hit James Potter very hard. Had he been alive, Dumbledore would never have gotten close to us. He despised the headmaster. Harry raised an eyebrow in surprise. He assumed that all the Potters had been aligned with the light. It was the impression they gave off after all. He hated Dumbledore, he questioned. James snorted. I remember many times he openly insulted him. I thought he was jealous, but it turns out he had no reason to be. My father was 100 times the man that old fossil could ever be. Lily nodded her agreement. I don't think he endeared himself to Dumbledore by marrying a black either, she added with a watery chuckle. Losing the Potter votes in the Gringotts was quite a blow, I suppose. Again, Harry found himself surprised by that information. Out of respect of simply not wanting to upset him, none of the Blacks ever spoke of the Potters when he was around, especially when he was younger. He'd only recently become aware of the family tree at Grimmauld Place, and had not paid much mind to it. It was something he would have to investigate when he had the chance. "So how did Dumbledore become so involved with you?" he asked curiously. James released a deep sigh. "My parents died just before 7th year at Hogwarts, and Dumbledore took me under his wing, taught me how to be a respectable lord. I suppose that was all a manipulation to get us back on side. I was naive, stupid even, and lapped it all up. The greatest wizard in recent memory helping out a poor orphan who didn't understand how the world worked." He snorted derisively. "It sickens me how I fell for it all. My father would be ashamed of me." Hearing the man speak helped Harry understand his failings much more. James Potter had his life turned around in the most unfortunate of ways, had been taken advantage of a man out for his own gain, and put too much trust in him. Dumbledore had looked out for only his own interest, and gave no consideration to James or the Potter traditions. Harry couldn't help but agree. His grandfather would probably be disappointed, but if he was anything as James described, he wouldn't hold a grudge. He would do all he could to help the man right his wrongs. "Well, I think James Potter, the minister that helped put an end to Lord Voldemort, would certainly up his opinion," he offered. James laughed unwittingly. "It's a start," he conceded. His demeanor grew serious as he looked upon the teen. "You remind me of him a lot, my father. Protective of your family with a sharp mind and sharper wand. He would have loved you." Harry found himself smiling at the words. "From the sounds of it, you're a lot like him too," he replied, "despite all your mistakes." James nodded gratefully. "Maybe," he shrugged. "I have a lot more to do before I can even compare." It was not said with self-deprecation but laced with determination. The man stared hard at the grave of his father, his eyes boring into the name of Charles Potter, a silent declaration seemingly being made. Eventually he slumped slightly. "That is for later," he whispered. "We're not here for a trip down memory lane or anything of the sort. We have to bury our son." Harry shifted his attention to the coffin behind them, the reason that they were gathered here. As interesting as the history lesson was, it was neither the time nor place for such. It was time to put an end to the final chapter of the life of Charlie Potter. James was the first to return to the coffin, his hand resting on the hard wood as he closed his eyes, his lips moving in silent words between him and the boy passed on. After a few moments, his lips ceased and his hand fell to his side as he released a deep breath, nodding for Lily to say her final piece. She too graced the wood with the touch of her hand, though her face was unmoving, her eyes closed tightly against the strain of tears threatening to fall. She spent longer than James and Harry suspected. It was to delay the inevitable, but for a moment longer more than her having further contemplations. Eventually she too stepped away from the coffin, albeit reluctantly, and immediately sought comfort in the arms of her husband. The loss she was experiencing evident by the tears that fell free, unashamedly. Harry soon took her place, his hand resting upon the lid. Mentally he was tired, the past days having revolved around this very moment. Burying his brother had once seemed so daunting, but now much more a relief. It was no selfish desire to be done with the occasion that elicited such a feeling, but the need for closure, the need for his brother to finally be at peace. With a shake of his head, his hand glided across the top of the wood before falling limply to his side, just as it had with James. Turning to the pair, they seemed to have composed themselves, somewhat ready to carry out the final duty of the ceremony. "Together?" James questioned. Harry nodded his agreement as he drew his wand, the Potters doing the same, each pointing it towards the coffin. In a silent, combined effort, it rose gently from the ground before it was guided into the large hole that had been carved for this purpose. After a few muttered spells by James, the coffin vanished from view, covered by a neat bedding of white stone. "I think we need to be alone for a while before facing them again," he whispered, his arm firmly around the shoulders of his wife. Harry nodded his understanding. "Will you be there?" Lily asked, almost nervously. "I will," Harry returned, his eyes firmly on the headstone of his brother. He listened to the retreating footsteps of James and Lily Potter as they left him alone in the graveyard, relieved that the funeral was now officially over, Again he shook his head as his attention shifted to the script that had been engraved into the headstone. Charles Charlie Potter. 30/07 1980 24 Radio 6 1995. A true Potter. Until the very end. An unwitting smile pulled at Harry's lips as he read. For the longest time he thought that being a true Potter was what James and Lily had presented to him. If being a true Potter was what Charlie did and stood for, they had certainly gone up in his estimation. Brick? Hogwarts was not somewhere he expected to be visiting again, so soon after departing somewhat hurriedly the last time he was within the castle. A part of him was glad to be back. The familiar smell of the great halls stirring many youthful memories of times long past within the formerly disgraced Black. Sirius had spent some of his best years here with James, Remus and even Peter, each now lost to him in some way. The rat had proven himself a traitor and coward. The werewolf, Dumbledore's man through and James, something of an enigma. He could never entirely forgive Prongs for his part in Harry's fate. I never thought I'd see Sirius Black brooding. A feminine voice broke into his thoughts. The man turned, his mouth forming into a hard line as he took in the appearance of Amelia Bones. He had nothing against her personally, had admired her for some time whilst at school, but the ministry had not endeared themselves to him recently and Amelia was firmly a part of that. Bones, he greeted her stiffly. Oh, come now, Sirius. You can do better than that, she replied, playfully. Sirius shook his head, a grin threatening betray him. She was a stern woman at the best of times but had always reveled in teasing him. A teenage Sirius Black would come undone at the devilish side of Amelia Bones, the striking beauty that could also dismantle you with her wand with apparent ease if one were to push her. He had experienced this for himself on more than one occasion, after all seemingly proving himself a glutton for punishment. A more cynical and experienced Sirius Black fell not for such a thing. He was no longer the boy that would melt at the sight of a smile from the older woman. There's not so much to be happy about, he shrugged. The ministry is as incompetent as ever and it is my son that has suffered because of it. He has lost his brother and lost a friend and you lot seem to be doing all you can to blame him. That is not true, Amelia denied. Cornelius acted on his own stupidity. He did not even consult me on what he was doing. Sirius snorted. Fudge was always a bastard. Someone should have buried him years ago. Are you admitting you had something to do with his vanishing? Amelia questioned with a raised eyebrow. He's not the brightest man and I would have thought our best aurors would have found him by now. I'm finding it hard to believe that he fled at all, was dealt with more like. Sirius frowned. The man had many enemies. The list of who would want him gone must be long, but none with more reason than your family and certainly none who would show the temerity and tenacity to do it, she countered. Sirius shrugged again.
Unless you are arresting me for it.
I have nothing to say. I can assure you, though, you would be wasting your time. I had nothing to do with it, and neither did any member of my family. We are no longer welcome in Britain if you remember. Amelia sighed, shaking her head. I don't believe for one moment it was you, she replied. Despite everything, you're not like the rest of your family. You were a bloody nuisance but not cruel. Sirius chuckled darkly. Things change. People change. He returned. Believe me, Bones, if I felt my son was in danger I would burn the ministry to the ground with all of you in it. But then again he would likely do it himself, he finished, nodding in the direction of Harry who had entered the room and was now sitting with Arcturus a short distance away. I saw the memory, Amelia sighed. He is quite something, your son. He's amazing, Sirius said proudly. I couldn't wish for anything more from him. Amelia smiled at the warmth exuding from the man. Had anyone told her Sirius Black would prove to be such a good father, she never would have believed it. He himself had been determined to remain a child for as long as he can. I'd like to meet him, she announced, not waiting for an invitation as she began walking towards where the boy was sat with the much-feared lord of his family. Her steps paused briefly, however, as Rufus arrived first, and began conversing with the teen, cursing under her breath. She quickened her pace, not wanting to miss the interaction. So you're the one who will be granting Lord Wayland a pardon? Harry Black addressed the man as she came within earshot of the conversation. It is not as simple as that, Rufus denied. Then we have nothing to say to each other, Interim Minister Scrimgeour. Harry bit back scathingly. Until you do the right thing, you will keep your distance. Rufus was undeterred as he stood at his full height. You have a duty to your country, he growled. You will play your part. It felt as though the temperature dropped considerably as the boy closed his eyes before slowly pushing himself to his feet. Emilia put her hand on her wand, ready to defend her foolish boss. The man had never been the most tactful, and now it seemed that such a lack would come back to bite him. Her own eyes widened as the flaring green orbs of the youngest Black became visible, her grip tightening as he towered over Rufus, who would come to regret his course of action. I have no duty to Britain, Harry whispered. Ever since I came here, my life has been fucked up time and time again. I was entered into a tournament against my will. My brother was murdered by a Dark Lord that you can't handle, and my friend imprisoned wrongly. Today is the day of my brother's funeral, and you dare come here trying to tell me of my responsibilities. Fuck off, Scrimgeour. Now is not the time, Rufus, Emilia chastised. The man seemed to think better of arguing with the woman who was giving him a glare of her own. With a shake of his shaggy head, he thankfully walked away from the confrontation, leaving Emilia to placate the family. Arcturus wore a look of amusement, and Sirius was seething at the audacity of the current minister. I apologize for Rufus. He is under a lot of pressure. She tried to defend the man. Harry turned his gaze towards her, the emerald color of his eyes unnerving her. Madame Bones, he greeted her surprisingly cordially. Dora speaks very highly of you. It's a shame your boss is such a wanker. Rufus is not one for games, she sighed. He's a very driven and pragmatic man. He's proven himself to be an idiot since he took office, and incompetent at best. Azkaban has fallen. Attacks are increasing, and he's failing to do anything worthy of protecting the British population. Harry reeled off. He's doing his best. The Dark Lord is a very dangerous man. Harry snorted. The Dark Lord is an egotistical child, with a superiority complex. Dangerous. Yes, but not invincible. I don't see why you haven't just sent the whole Auror force after him and wiped him off the earth. Even he cannot block that many killing curses. Emilia raised an eyebrow at the teen. It seemed as though Rufus was not the only pragmatic one. If only it were that simple, she huffed. Many times during the last war we tried just that. He is an exceedingly gifted wizard and has foiled every attempt by either killing several of our own or fleeing if it were to his advantage. Yea, he does that, Harry conceded. What is it Scrimgeour wants with me? Emilia sighed. He wants it to appear that you are working with the ministry to put an end to the Dark Lord. He seems to think people will take comfort knowing you are on side and helping. He wants a poster boy, Sirius interjected as Harry laughed to himself. I advised against it, Emilia explained. You were right to. No offense, but I will not work with the ministry in any capacity until Leo Whelan gets his pardon. Even then it is unlikely. Emilia nodded her understanding. The boy was proving himself to be rather interesting, and she could see why Tonks would become enamored with him. He was undoubtedly a very gifted wizard, likely the most of his generation from what she had seen so far, and there was no denying he had inherited the aesthetics of the Blacks, though she could still see a considerable amount of Potter in him. That, along with the fact he was due to become the next Lord Black, would make him desirable to most, particularly the purebloods. Her eyes shifted to the man he looked up to as his father. She too had such thoughts of Sirius when she had been younger. Though a few years her junior, he had been very handsome if immature for her more driven personality. It would have been a good match, and not one she would have been upset by had her father pursued such a thing. The man had died before even the subject of her marriage could be broached. As such, Emilia Bones had never been inclined to marry, and now it was only her and her niece left since the last war. Her family had been decimated at the hands of the Death Eaters, more than most. I'm sure Rufus will see sense, eventually, she offered. I will not do the disservice of asking if he has contacted you. I will, however, have to insist on Barty Crouch being returned to my custody. I will have him with you by the morning, Arcturus assured her. He's become rather the burden and is beginning to test my patience. Emilia nodded appreciatively. Were it any other than the Blacks that had taken him, she would have pressed the issue much sooner. Had she done so, it would be more likely, she would never see the man again with them, denying any involvement and leaving no evidence to follow. "Thank you," she answered gratefully. Any reply or further conversation was cut short, as James Potter stood upon the dais usually reserved for the school stall, and fired off a bang from his wand, loud enough to garner the attention of those within the hall. "I wanted to begin by thanking all of you for coming today. Charlie would be surprised and humbled by the showing, so again I thank you." A gentle round of applause sounded, courtesy of those present, some egos having been stroked and others simply appreciating the sentiment, having not forgotten the sacrifices of the Potter family forced upon them by the fall of the Dark Lord. The family had been torn asunder and Charlie having suffered considerably. "Although we are here to say goodbye to my son, the reason for his passing must be addressed," James continued. A smatter of muttering could be heard at his statement, with many shuffling in discomfort. Undeterred, James's gaze swept across the room before he spoke once more, his voice quieter but heard no less. "Charlie was murdered by Voldemort. You may not want to believe he is back, but the evidence is there. Azkaban has fallen. Witches, wizards and muggles alike are being killed indiscriminately as they were 13 years ago. The dark mark has been seen darkening our skies. What would you have us do, Potter?" A voice spoke up. Harry's eyes snapped towards the man. His son and fellow competitor sat next to him, his legs still heavily bandaged. "Well, Mr. Diggory, I would not have us holed up in our houses cowering behind wards that won't keep a determined Dark Lord out. My own home was under the Fidelius when he attacked, and he still made it in," James explained. "Bagnall proved herself to be incompetent during the last war, and the ministry is not exactly filling me with confidence this time around either. So, this is another ploy by the light side to have Dumbledore installed as minister," an angry voice accused. James shook his head. "Dumbledore doesn't have the guts to do what needs to be done." "Who is it you would suggest, Potter?" Arcturus questioned, the disdain in his voice evident. "Me," James answered simply. "None of you can deny that I have more reason than any to want the Dark Lord gone, just as none of you can deny that I will do whatever is necessary to see it done." There were many a murmured agreement, and James held his hands up to silence the room. "I can think of no better way to honor the memory of my son by putting an end to the man that killed him. I will be putting myself forward for the role of minister in the coming days, and hope I can count on the support of those that want to see an end to Voldemort once and for all." With his final words ringing in the ears of the guests, he took his seat and immediately emptied a glass of fire whiskey as the crowd slowly emerged from their stupor, many surprised by the declaration but very few able to find reason to oppose it. "Well, that was interesting," Amelia mused aloud. "Rufus does not seem to be pleased." Harry shifted his focus to the man, almost amused by how purple with rage he had flushed. Already, he disliked Scrimgeour. There was just something so very disingenuous about him. Forgoing wasting his time pondering the current interim minister, he gave James a subtle nod of approval. Despite his feelings towards him, the speech he gave was rather impressive. He used just enough personal justification and had given the people what they sorely needed, even if they would not admit that was the case. For them, they needed someone like James Potter to lead the charge against Tom. Harry merely needed him to allow his own continuing the pursuit of justice and vengeance. If James were to successfully take office, it could only prove to be a boon for him. The Dark Lord paced back and forth within the chambers he had been given at Malfoy Manor. Had Harry Potter not destroyed his ancestral home, he would have sought shelter there, a place that he had control of the wards, and was not constantly interrupted by Lucius and his foolish spawn. The reason for his current demeanor was simple. The funeral of Charlie Potter was taking place, and he had no way in which he could offer his own parting gift to the boy that had been labeled his greatest threat. Lord Voldemort scoffed at the thought. The boy had proven to be no threat to him, but certainly his greatest mistake in life. He wanted nothing more than to bid farewell to his adversary in the only way he knew, but it was not to be. He had very little at his disposal, relying on the charity of his staunchest supporters. He grimaced at the thought. He'd expected to rise from the ashes of his demise, right the wrongs that had occurred and pick up his cause where he had left it. Again, such a thing had not happened. Nothing had gone in his favor and there was only one person to blame. Harry Potter, the meddlesome older brother of the boy who had been declared hero, the one who had brought the downfall of the greatest Dark Lord to emerge in living memory. It had been the forgotten child that had proven to be much more than expected thus far. To Lord Voldemort, the mere fact that he continued to dare to breathe was the utmost insult, an insult that would be dealt with accordingly. His jaw tightened as he ground his teeth. As much as he wanted to punish the boy for his interference, he was in no position to do so. Not only was he hiding under the formidable wards of the Blacks, he himself did not have the resources to do so. Oh, he was certainly doing all he could to bring as many to his cause as possible. The process, however, was progressing painfully slow. According to Lucius, very few were willing to risk their positions as they once had, the reputations that had been left in tatters for their support of him in the last war barely worthy of the titles they carried. Cowards, he muttered internally. They too would learn what happens to those that do not give the Dark Lord what he wants. They too would suffer the consequences, when the time was right. For now he needed to use the same charisma and charm he'd once employed whilst dealing with these fools, so many years ago. If that were to fail, he had other ways to convince them. He always had other ways. Potter may have gotten the better of him thus far, but the setbacks were only temporary. The Dark Lord had risen against all odds. He had returned, and Harry Potter would soon learn that crossing him was folly, that it ended only in one way. Before long he would join his weak brother in death, and those so foolish to question his power would fall to their knees and press their lips to the hem of his robes, the way that all who find themselves in his presence should break. The chatter throughout the room had shifted to the topic of James Potter's announcing his intention to run for Minister of Magic, many surprised by the turn of events and many commenting on the merit of the man. There was no denying that he, above any, would want to see to the end of the Dark Lord. That could certainly not be questioned. Rufus really is unhappy, the voice of Amelia Bones broke into his thoughts. Sirius looked towards the dais where the current minister could be seen having a furious conversation with James Potter, the former again purpled with apparent rage and the latter seemingly bored and dismissive of the ranting being aimed at him. If Sirius knew anything about James, it was that once his mind was set on something he would not give up until he had it. One only had to look at how long he had pursued Lily during their schooling years to understand the drive he possessed. Sirius, however, found himself uncaring at best to whom would take the mantle of minister, and he found himself shrugging in such manner. So long as whoever takes office leaves my family alone, I couldn't give a hippogriff shit who it is. Amelia shook her head in amusement. You always did have such a way with words, she sighed mockingly. Sirius found a smirk pulling at his lips. He never worked on you, Bones. You were far too prudish to fall for my charm. Amelia narrowed her eyes at him, his grin making it difficult for her to be so irritated with the man. Oh, I was never a prude. I just had more respect for myself than to let little Sirius Black have his way with me and brag to the other marauders. Sirius rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly at the mention of the name of himself and his teenage friends. We all grow up eventually, he defended. Amelia raised a delicate brow before conceding the point with a nod. True, usually by now you would have asked about what underwear I was wearing and if I needed it inspecting. Sirius chuckled. That line worked more than you would believe. I suppose you were rather charming in your own way, she replied. You may well need it. The Chief Warlock seems to be heading over here and it doesn't look as though it is me he wishes to speak with. Sirius grimaced as Amelia turned away, the smell of lemon sherbets wafting under his sensitive nose. With a sigh he faced the headmaster, who had his usual benevolent smile in place along with those twinkling eyes. Sirius, I was hoping we could have a chat, Dumbledore greeted him, ignoring the frown marring the younger man's features. Can this not wait? Sirius huffed irritably. Perhaps, but contacting you has proven to be all but impossible. These past days, I fear that you have taken residence where missives are not very welcome. I dare say even Fawkes has been frustrated by his inability to locate you. It's good to know the wards are working as intended. Sirius bit back. Dumbledore nodded appreciatively, scrutinizing the younger man over his half-moon spectacles. I would like you to consider taking up the post of Professor of Defense Against the Dark Arts at Hogwarts." Sirius snorted in surprise at the request. "You must be joking." "I can assure you I am, as you yourself would often say, Sirius. After everything that has happened, you expect me to work for you. What's your game, Dumbledore?" The older man held up a hand to placate the anger of the younger. "I am, before anything, headmaster of this school. It is my responsibility to ensure my students have the best instruction at their disposal. Are you denying that you wouldn't make a more than exceptional professor?" Sirius shook his head in disbelief. Defense had always been one of his best subjects, something he would consider himself more than adept in. His years as a hit wizard could attest to his ability, and his knowledge of curses, counter-curses, and such could be matched by very few. He was a black after all, and the dark arts were their forte. Before he could deny the man, Dumbledore spoke once more. "I understand that you have no wish to join the Order. Despite what you think of me, this is purely for the benefit of the students here. Nothing more. I have no intention of prying into your life or that of your family business. This is nothing other than a headmaster attempting to secure excellent education for his students." Again Sirius shook his head, unable to articulate his thoughts. "Consider it, Sirius," Dumbledore urged. "Please do let me know your decision at your earliest convenience." With his final words spoken, the headmaster took his leave, with Sirius only able to stare after him dumbly. Of all the things the man could have discussed, he offered him a job, as unbelievable as it seemed. "For what it's worth, Sirius, I think you would make a fine defense professor," Amelia chipped in, having heard the conversation between himself and Dumbledore. "You always were a nosy bint, Bones," he huffed. Amelia grinned. "How do you think I rose so high in my profession?" she returned with a wink. Sirius rolled his eyes. The past 15 minutes were ones that had left him feeling confused, and with the diddings of a headache setting in, Bones had sapped enough of his energy, and Dumbledore even more so. He knew not what to do about the offer. He wanted to dismiss it out of hand, having no desire to work with the man that had caused a plethora of problems for him so many years ago. For some reason, he had stilled. Harry no longer needed him as he once had, and that had left him with a lot of time on his hands. He'd not really considered becoming an educator seriously before, but it certainly held considerable appeal. For one, he would feel as though he was serving a purpose once more and not stagnating as he had felt these past months. He shrugged as he took a sip of his fire whiskey. Perhaps it was something to consider after all. He knew the castle, was rather fond of the place, more so than Greenwood Place certainly. With a sigh he emptied the glass and decided he needed to sleep, before even contemplating it. It was all too sudden to make any decisions without clarity and without discussing with those that mattered most. He had no doubt that Harry would be supportive if it was what he decided he wanted. The problem was he couldn't be sure himself just if it was. Break. He'd managed to slip away from the castle with none being the wiser, too engrossed on discussing who would be named as the permanent next minister as they were. For a while he wandered aimlessly throughout the grounds, barely avoiding a flailing branch of the whomping willow as he ventured a little too close to the violent tree. Why such a thing would be placed in a school full of children was beyond reason if one was not privy to its origins. His father had told him it had been placed there for when Lupin experienced his monthly transformation, so its presence was not such a ridiculous notion. It would certainly be preferable to be lashed by a branch than mauled by a werewolf. He frowned as he remembered just what was on the other side of the tunnel, a very easy way to access the school that had seemingly been left unchecked for over 2 decades. Flicking his wand into his hand, he sent a spell at the large knot at the bottom of the trunk, stilling the swaying limbs. The hole near the roots was a tight fit, but he managed to squeeze himself through all the same and worked his way through the tunnel, eventually reaching a trapdoor that would take him inside the shrieking shack. The hinges creaked and the heavy wood displaced a considerable cloud of dust as it crashed open, the floor groaning in protest at the impact. None had been here for some time, though the walls and floor were littered with claw marks, furniture destroyed by the creature that had been housed here. The gouges deep. Harry ran his finger down a particularly prominent one, shaking his head. He didn't know Lupin well at all, but it was clear his transformations were deeply unpleasant. Turning away from the debris and damage, he reached the front door in only a few strides, the shack being rather small in size, and aimed his wand towards the handle. Hissing under his breath, he began casting some wards. Nothing lethal, but nothing pleasant either. If any were to disturb the inside of the building, they would find themselves in considerable pain and incapacitated, unable to move until he decided it was convenient for him to retrieve them. He doubted Tom himself would fall for such a thing, but there would certainly be those that would. Tom was an exceptional wizard, unlike most of the sycophants that worshipped him. More than a few of them would be unable to detect the protections he had put in place. For the life of him, he could not understand why Dumbledore had not already put his own layer of protections over the place already. It was a vulnerability that was simply unacceptable. It made him question, even more so, the competence of the revered man. Shaking his head once more, he exited and closed the door behind him, locking it with a simple charm, his mind switching to just what had happened to Dora. She had not been at the school when he arrived, his grandfather informing that she had been called away, not that it was his business, but he had hoped she would be there, her presence having been the only comfort of the day. He sighed as he turned away from the door, shrugging at the whereabouts of the woman. Perhaps something had come up at work. If so, she would let him know as quickly as she could. It wasn't like her to simply disappear without explanation. His feet carried him down the path away from the building so feared by the students. The hour of the day, seeing the sun set as dusk began to set in on the late July evening. It would have been Charlie's birthday on the morrow, had he lived to see it, and his own the following day. He wanted not to focus on such frivolity. There was little to celebrate other than reaching his majority, something his brother would never achieve, all thanks to Tom Riddle. His hand clenched in anger at the thought as he vanished with but a turn, his mind made up before consideration. The Dark Lord may have been absent on the day Charlie had been put to rest, but Harry would allow the man no such peace. Today, more than any, Tom needed a reminder of just what he had done, and if he couldn't make him pay in blood of his own, he would take it from one willing to draw it for a cause that would never come to fruition. It was a feeling he thought had abandoned him permanently that pulled him from his slumber with a gasp. Warmth, it was something that had become so distant, so foreign to him during his imprisonment, and now it enveloped him, and he snuggled deeper into the thick duvet that had been wrapped around him for the past days. He'd felt rotten the first time he had awoken, feverish and cold that seemed to have settled into every fiber of his being. He remembered a foul potion being forced down his throat, burning all the way down to his stomach as a familiar voice uttered comforting words in his ear. Not long after the burning began to abate, he fell into unconsciousness once more. The process was repeated more times than he could count in the state he was in. It may have been only a day or could have been weeks, he knew not. All he knew now was that he was warm, and whatever concoction had been thrust upon him had worked its magic. He had not felt so well since before he had been taken to that cursed island. "How are you feeling?" The voice of Cassie intruded into his thoughts. His gaze shifted to her, his stomach sinking from guilt at her appearance. Heavy, dark circles had formed around her eyes, and her skin had paled considerably. It was clear she had not slept in days. "Aye, much better," he answered sadly, the smile she gave him doing nothing to alleviate the heartbreak he was feeling. "Good," she whispered through unshed tears. "I really thought I might lose you there, you foolish boy." "I'm sorry, Cass," he offered sincerely. "I know," she returned, taking his hand and giving it a squeeze, using the other to wipe at tired eyes. "When was the last time you slept?" "It's been a few days," she confessed. "I had to watch you give you the potion every couple of hours, and undo as much damage the Dementors did on your mind. I could." Leo gave her a grateful smile as he tightened his grip on her. "I don't deserve you, Cass." "No, you don't," she agreed with a frown. "But you got me, and as much as I want to bloody well curse you, I think you've suffered enough." Leo chuckled before sobering. "I don't know where I would be without you. Maybe dead, prison, or doing something I have no love for. I could never put into words how grateful I am that you took pity on a poor Irish boy with no future." Cassie shook her head as a tear finally broke free. "Stupid boy," she choked. You reminded me of someone I cared for deeply once. You were like him in so many ways, but so different in others. I never thought I could care for any other as much as I did him, until you came along. You're the best thing that ever happened to me, Leo." The young man felt a lump form in his throat at the sentiment. He knew that deep down the woman cared for him to some extent. Had she not, he certainly would not have been graced with her presence in his life for so long. "Who do I remind you of?" he asked. "Gellert," Cassie answered, unashamedly. Seeing his look of annoyance, she continued. "He was an exceptional man, despite what he became. I was enthralled by him, as was any lucky enough to meet him. It was a shame he decided to pursue his foolish venture." "Were you in love with him?" Cassie almost cackled at the question. "No. For the longest time I thought I was. But no, I cared for him as I do Arcturus. He was one of few that could hope to match me in the mind arts, and I respected him for it. We were two of a similar mind, a similar ambition, though his proved to be his downfall. Gellert wanted to rule the world, whereas I wanted to live in my own, away from where I would be forced to marry a man whom my father chose. It wasn't until Arcturus became the Lord Black that I felt I could come home, and by then, Gellert had made his choice. He went to war and I returned. I never saw him again." Leo felt saddened for the woman. The way in which the British purebloods treated the daughters of their families did not sit well with him. "I'm sorry," he offered once more. "You have nothing to apologize for. You have made an old woman the proudest she has ever felt, and have done since the day I took you in. Don't get me wrong, there have been times I've wanted to wring your bloody neck, but I didn't. That should tell you all you need to know." Leo nodded as a smile tugged at his lips. He stood, removing the duvet, and pulled the woman to her feet and into his arms. "I always wondered what my mother was like. She was taken from me before I even got to know her, but I somehow ended up with one. I know you didn't give birth to me, but I couldn't have asked for a better mother than you have been." Cassiopeia Black. He felt the woman sniffle into his chest, so he did the only thing he could think of, and held her tighter. For the longest time, this woman had cared for him, taught him, and made sure he had everything he needed. She would write to him, whilst he had been at school, insisted he came back to her during the holidays, and had been there for him as any mother would. From the little he knew of the woman that had birthed him, she too would be grateful for Cassiopeia Black and all she had done for her son. "Now, I think it is time you got some sleep," he whispered before placing a kiss on the top of her head. Cassie nodded, and Leo led her from the room to her own a few doors down the corridor. Helping her into bed, he pulled the duvet over her and tucked her in the same way she had for him over the years. "You're still not well," she chastised. "I am fine," he assured her. "As much as I wish I could lay in bed, there is another lady I have to go and see," he explained with a slight wince. "I see how it is," Cassie sighed. "I'm being replaced by a younger woman." Leo smirked as he kissed the woman on the cheek. "There will never be anyone that can replace you, Cass." With his final words said, he left the room to allow the woman to finally get some sleep. He made a mental note to check in on her when he returned home, but he had somewhere else he had to be. It had been weeks since he had seen her last, and he doubted that the reception he would receive would be the most welcoming. After a quick shower and ignoring his pale visage in the mirror, he left the large home through the front door before he disapparated and appeared a short walk away from the pub owned by Katie's parents. As he came upon the building, the memories of his first and only visit thus far surfaced, and he sighed deeply. If Katie's father hadn't been fond of him then, he certainly wouldn't be now. He was expecting a rather frosty welcome from the girl herself, let alone the man that had proven to be the epitome of a protective parent. The music he could faintly hear from outside the pub increased in volume as he pushed open the door. The 24 or so patrons within sitting groups dotted around the room. None paid attention to him as he approached the bar, and he reached it unhindered. He stood patiently for several moments, watching as Katie's parents went about their trade, taking orders and serving drinks, neither becoming aware of his presence until Sarah Bell found herself stood in front of him, a look of relief and irritation marring her features. "Upstairs, third door on the right," she said simply, gesturing with a jerk of her head. Leo nodded gratefully as he followed her directions and found himself outside the door in question, his mouth suddenly dry and palms sweating in a mixture of nervousness and excitement. He had missed the girl, more than he realized, but he was not looking forward to the tirade that would be unleashed upon him when her temper undoubtedly got the better of her. Releasing a deep breath, he knocked and rubbed his hands on the outside of his trousers. A few moments passed, and as he was about to knock once more, the sound of footsteps drew closer. The door opened slowly, and the sight of the girl of his thoughts greeted him, her hair in disarray and visage pale, pronouncing the dark circles around her eyes even more so. Said eyes widened momentarily in surprise at his appearance before a confliction of emotion passed over features. Relief, anger and disbelief before settling on an almost blank mask of confusion. "Hello, lass," he spoke, his voice laced with concern. At his words her eyes narrowed and jaw tightened as she continued to stare at him, unimpims. He felt himself wither under her gaze, the discomfort of the situation getting the better of something. "Please, say something." Katie deflated, though her anger did not abate. "I don't know if I want to hug you or kill you, you idiot." Unwittingly he smiled at her declaration, pleased to simply hear her voice after all this time. Again her eyes narrowed at the gesture, and Leo spoke before her fury found its voice. "Would it help if I said I'm sorry? It would be a start." Leo sighed, nodding his understanding. What had happened could not have been easy for the girl. "I am sorry, lass. I should have spoken to you or found a way to explain what was happening." "I thought you were dead," Katie returned hotly, prodding him hard in the chest. "I had to find out you were in Azkaban from a newspaper article, and then it was attacked by him. I thought he had killed you." Leo nodded apologetically, the guilt he felt only worsening. I've got no excuses," he conceded. "Only that I did what I had to." "And what exactly was that?" "I went to get as much information from his followers as I could, about him, about what his plans were." "You know who?" Him," Leo confirmed. "You might not like it, but it had to be done, and I was in the best position to do it. I want him gone. Katie, for what he did to Harry, for what he did to Charlie, my family, and for what he could do to you. It will only be a matter of time before he turns his attention to me for what I did to Malfoy. And I couldn't just sit and wait for that." His emotions began to get the better of him the more he spoke, his worries and concerns being vocalized for the first time. When he was alone and contemplating them, they were easy to dismiss, to reassure himself that any of the horrific scenarios that played out in his mind could never come to pass. What he had learnt of Voldemort was to not be so blasé towards the man. If anything, he was exceedingly gifted at getting what he wanted, and Leo would not take his chances on hope when he had already lost so much to him. He wouldn't allow anything else to be taken. "Maybe I was selfish, but I would do it all again, if it helps to keep you all safe, lass. You can be mad, I deserve that, but I can't promise I won't do anything to make sure you're okay." Katie could only shake her head at him in irritation. "You're such a pig-headed idiot," she sighed as she wrapped her arms around him, squeezing him tightly. She was still furious with him, and would be for some time, but she couldn't deny that his intentions didn't warm her heart. Even though he would likely cause her to grey prematurely, he was one of the good ones, and she couldn't help but feel proud of him. Very few would be willing to take the risks he had to keep those they cared for safe. "So you planned to go there?" she questioned. Leo nodded. "Aye, but only if he came back and the opportunity came up. He did, and it did, so I had to take it." Katie released a deep breath, narrowing her eyes at him once more. "What am I going to do with you?" she asked exasperatedly. "Just tell me you missed me," Leo returned with a grin. "Don't push your bloody luck," Katie warned. "You're lucky I can't use my wand, or I would have hexed you." Leo bowed his head gratefully. "You're too nice to me," he replied cheekily. Katie huffed, frowning at him. "Aren't you still wanted by the ministry?" Leo shrugged uncaringly. "Probably. I should keep my head down, I suppose." Katie tutted at him as she pulled him into her room and closed the door before kissing him deeply. "I just wanted to see what it was like to kiss a wanted criminal," she quipped. "How was it?" "I've not decided yet," she answered, with a smirk. And I won't until you tell me exactly where the stupid idea of you going to Azkaban came from." Leo shook his head. This would be a long conversation, and he doubted he would escape it without a severe dressing down by the already unimpressed girl. Break. To wizards and muggles alike, the expanse of wall his hand hovered barely an inch from would be innocuous, the latter simply being driven away by the most subtle of wards, the former likely to never come across this place. Even if such a thing were to happen, the average witch or wizard would be unaware of the magic here, so faint as it was. Harry himself almost missed it and would have were it not for his certainty he was in the right place. Such a seemingly inconsequential stretch of stone, the only thing separating him from the majority of wealth wizarding Britain held. He frowned briefly as he considered the laxity and security and snorted softly. Such laxity was in fact a stroke of genius. The muggles simply needed to be kept away, and wizards were mostly ignorant of the practices of their counterparts. None would ever have reason to even explore this avenue and would not have the knowledge needed to do so, nor the ability to execute what Harry intended. The goblins were not foolish creatures, particularly where security was concerned. Undoubtedly the ward he faced was created by wizards. He suspected had the goblins known of this, the wards would be much more extensive than what he had found. He knew their magic, had felt it only the previous day when he had paid the bank a visit, under the guise of retrieving something from the family vault. He had no need of anything within, only to know exactly where the older vaults were located and any security he would face. He had learnt much about the bank through his covert observations. The weaknesses within were none, the vaults accessible only by the creatures that ruled the twisting tunnels beneath the ground with iron vigilance. Or so they thought. Harry had advantages no other did, and had laid a plan that would leave the rude, uncouth creatures baffled as to what had happened. Instinctively he squeezed the lump in his pocket, checking the cloak was still within before shifting to the other, ensuring his broom and the file he needed was there also. The days leading up to Charlie's funeral had been spent researching the bank, the goblins and even muggle maps of the London Underground. He suspected that would be his best way in, and had not been disappointed by what he found. The tunnels under the city spread in every direction across the length and breadth of the metropolis and beyond. The bank and the tunnels created by the goblins had existed long before these. It was only logical that their paths came close to crossing at some junction or other, and measures having to be taken by wizards to prevent this. Harry had found this place with surprising ease, having only needed to explore the tracks at a couple muggle stations. He had started at Charing Cross, being closest to the Leaky Cauldron and Diagon Alley, before moving on to Leicester Square, where he found himself now in the early hours of the morning. He sighed at the apparent ease of the task, though he doubted it would be so. He couldn't be certain just how much stone separated him from where he needed to be. He cursed Bellatrix under his breath. The reason such an undertaking had become necessary. He had yet to speak to the woman, solely here on the word of Leo, who had apparently woken 2 days ago. The boy had been in rather fine spirits as they had caught up the previous day, and he had explained his findings from his time in Azkaban. His suspicions about Tom's snake was something he decided to ponder later. The horcrux in the bank was the priority and likely the most difficult to obtain. Rolling up his sleeves, he cast a silencing charm around the area. Not wanting to draw any unnecessary attention to what he was doing, shifting through an inordinate amount of stone was unlikely to be the quietest of work. Muttering under his breath, he manipulated the wards, shifting them so a gap just big enough to admit him could be made. With his preparation done, he used a boring charm to remove a large section of the wall before shrinking it to the size of a matchbox and placing it on the ground carefully, fully intending to replace whatever he took away to cover his entry into the bank. He continued in this vein until a sizable collection of neatly arranged bricks steadily grew. For what became several hours, he toiled away at the menial labor, removing chunk upon chunk as he slowly progressed onwards, stopping occasionally to rest and drink when needed. Both morning and afternoon passed, and it was early evening when the sound of rushing water could be heard from somewhere ahead, and he knew he was close. Carefully he removed another piece of stone and was greeted by the sight of faint light as he breached the final barrier. Pressing one eye to the small hole, he breathed a sigh of relief. He recognized what was in front of him, the sound of rushing water having been the first clue and the sight of the thief's downfall confirming his suspicions. From up here the journey into the bowels of the bank would have taken an age had he not come prepared. Patiently he waited until a cart passed on the winding track, carrying a customer to their vault before he set to work. He had at least 3 minutes before the next would come, having been informed of such by the goblin that had escorted him to the Black Vault during his own visit. Unwittingly, the creature had given him a piece of vital information under the impression he was simply satisfying a teenager's curiosity. Such was the faith in their security that Barchoke had not batted an eyelid at the seemingly inane question. Hurriedly, Harry cast another, more complex charm, one that would give the illusion of the wall wean in place before he removed it and withdrew his cloak. Throwing it over himself, he unshrunk his broom and cast a disillusionment charm on it before covering as much as he could with the remaining fabric and mounted it.